If so, we are just moments away from World War III, and they're delusional. The diplomacy is of very poor professional quality, and the understanding of history is nil.
Has US failed to break India-Russia's friendship?
And India at that time very capably pursued a policy between the two.
How helpless do you feel US would be seeing that hug between Mr. Putin and Mr. Modi?
It is not going to change the way the war is conducted. India is not presenting itself as a point of leverage for the United States against Russia. On the contrary, it has already turned into a Russia-NATO war, putting lipstick on a pig.
Indian Prime Minister Modi visited Russia recently, and visuals of Putin and Modi sharing a warm hug was seen across the world, especially in the US. The US immediately raised concerns with India over its Russia ties, but India-Russia ties go back several decades. And they actually started at a time when the US refused to even interact with India. Russia was always there still. Both nations have faced mounting pressure from the US. Russia faced sanctions, while India received repeated warnings against buying Russian oil. Have Russia-India ties broken American hegemony? I'm SHIVAN CHANANA. Welcome to this special episode of Game Plan, as I'll be discussing this with Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, an International Affairs Analyst, author and historian joining us from Brussels. Dr. Doctorow, thank you so much for joining in right here on Game Plan.
A pleasure.
Has US failed to break India-Russia's friendship? And has Washington been attempting this all this while? Do you feel so?
I think that the Washington policy towards Mr. Modi and towards this visit to Moscow is illustrative of a much broader issue in Washington, and that is the bubble in which the policymakers live, their immunity to the real world outside, and their delusional understanding of what can be done on the world stage. The diplomacy is of very poor professional quality, and the understanding of history is nil. You said that Russian-Indian ties go back several decades. Well, if we take it to Soviet-Indian relations, it goes back to with respect to what is going on now. There's a perfect continuity from the 1950s up to present. Considering that Mr. Nehru and his followers were the leaders, along with Yugoslavia, in what was called the non-aligned bloc. And India at that time very capably pursued a policy between the two military and political blocs of East and West of the Soviet Union and of the Washington-led West. That remains the case. The Indians always tread a very delicate line to avoid antagonizing either of the parties. And they were always, going back to this period in the 1950s, looking to the Soviet Union and then later to Russia for military supplies and other critical supplies for their economy, while at the same time trying to maintain good relations with the United States. That takes a very fine sense of diplomacy and walking a narrow line.
Dr. Doctorow, in his first visit overseas after coming to power again, Prime Minister Modi chose to visit Russia. Now, initially, US raised concerns with India over this. But soon after, I think within a day, the White House press secretary clarified that India is a strategic partner with whom we engage in full and frank dialogue, quote unquote.
With whom we engage in full and frank dialogue, including their relationship with Russia. And we've talked about this before.
How helpless do you feel US would be seeing that hug between Mr. Putin and Mr. Modi?
Insane voices in Washington. I didn't mean to leave the impression that the whole of Washington is living in a bubble. There are some people who understand what can be done and to try to keep American policy within the feasible. And as you just mentioned, the day after change of tack by the State Department is demonstrating that there are people in Washington to understand that they cannot separate Russia and India, that this goes back a long way and is a deliberate policy of India that is unchangeable. Now, so they decided to put a pretty face on this fact and to try to extract some kind of advantage for the United States by saying that, yes, we can, since India has such privileged relations with Russia, we can use India as an influence on Russia to stop the war. Well, that is, I said, putting lipstick on a pig. It is not going to change the way the war is conducted. India is not presenting itself as a point of leverage for the United States against Russia. On the contrary, I think it was outstanding that during the visit, early in the visit, Mr. Modi was taken to the exhibition grounds, the VDNH, in downtown Moscow, and visited the pavilion on atomic power and atomic energy, and said, when he heard the history of how the United States in the 1990s tried to reduce Russia's nuclear programs to nil, and how that has been reversed, and how Russia is now the leading supplier of enriched uranium to power stations across the world, including the United States. Mr. Modi said very clearly, and this was shown on Russian television, "We support you." That is the present state of relations. India is deeply understanding the travails that Russia is experiencing as it is sanctioned by the United States. And Mr. Modi personally has an experience of this. Before he came to power, he was sanctioned by the United States, who denounced various policies and preferences of Mr. Modi. So this is not an abstract consideration for India's leadership. They know very well what the back of the hand dealt by the United States can mean. They felt it personally on their own skin.
Dr. Doctorow, seeing the way Russia has risen in the face of US sanctions, and most of it has happened in the last 2 years, and no one expected Russia to come up the way it did, in spite of all the sanctions that were imposed against it. India, of course, defied US at every step as well to go ahead for its own personal interests when it came to Russian oil. Do you feel the way Russia has come up and the way India has defied it, the two nations have a broken US hegemony?
It takes more than two nations to break that hegemony. And I think India is aware not only of the specific advantages it had from buying Russian oil at very advantageous prices, but this is not transactional. This is a deep commitment to maintaining Russia as a counterforce to the United States, and thereby breaking hegemony. But I think there's something additional to mention here, and that is that within the relations with Russia, Russia's rapprochement with Iran is particularly useful to India. Iran is potentially a major transit country for hydrocarbons to India, a safe delivery to India, and at advantageous prices and conditions. So in this respect, it is not just Russia, but Russia's allied countries that are bringing and will bring considerable economic as well as political benefit to India in its own region.
I don't know very well him. I don't know. I had meetings with him.
Now, Zelensky, of course, the Ukrainian president, has been extremely jittery over the upcoming US elections. And of course, that is going to be having a major bearing on him because there is a major chance that Donald Trump comes to power again. If that happens, what will that mean for Zelensky and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war? We're just months away from it now.
The problem with the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war is that it has already turned into a Russia-NATO war, in which Ukraine just happens to be the battlefield. The possibility of this escalating further in a very dangerous way is now being discussed by the NATO allies in their meeting in Washington. We have heard conflicting reports about U.S. intentions of stationing its Tomahawk medium-range missiles in Europe. The Russians are saying on their television that the intention is to give these to Ukraine. If so, we are just moments away from World War III. So this situation is difficult. The situation is fraught with dangers all around. India's attempts to maintain a balanced foreign policy and to assist Russia as within its possibilities to maintain its balance and to offset American hegemony is a major contributing factor to stability and to our not slipping into a fatal war.
All right, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, thank you so much for joining in and sharing all your insights with me right here on Game Plan. That was Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, International Affairs Analyst, author and historian, joining us from Brussels. Always a pleasure speaking with you.